FBI arrests an Air National Guardsman suspected of leaking Pentagon documents. South Korea once again refused allegations of the U.S. spying on Seoul as suggested in the leaked papers. North Korea reports its latest missile test launch was a solid-fuel intercontinental ballistic missile. South Korea's domestic consumption seemingly picking up, but its other major economic pillar, exports, continues to struggle. Good afternoon. We start with the FBI arresting a U.S. Air National Guardsman suspected of leaking military documents. Amid concerns over the security breach, the Pentagon has reportedly put tighter restrictions on access to classified documents. Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
An arrest has been made in connection to the leaked Pentagon document scandal that shook the world last weekend. The announcement was made by U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland on Thursday, local time.
Today, the Justice Department arrested Jack Douglas Teixeira in connection with an investigation into alleged unauthorized removal, retention, and transmission of classified national defense information.
According to the Attorney General, the suspect is a 21-year-old U.S. Air National Guardsman from Massachusetts. Having joined the Guard in 2019, the suspect is a member of the 102nd Intelligence Wing of the Massachusetts Air National Guard as a cyber transport systems journeyman. He was in charge of keeping the internet working at air bases. According to officials, the 21-year-old is believed to be the leader of an online chat group where hundreds of photographs of both secret and top-secret documents were first uploaded. Calling itself the Thug Shaker Central, the group consists of 20 to 30 young men and teenagers with a fascination for guns, military gear, and video games. Teixeira will likely face charges under the Espionage Act, with each charge carrying a prison term of up to 10 years. And with prosecutors likely to treat each leaked document as a separate count in his indictment, he could face a very long jail sentence. Teixeira is set to appear at a Boston federal court on Friday to face charges related to the incident. Meanwhile, the Pentagon documents leak has led to tighter restrictions on who gets access to some of the U.S. military's top secrets. CNN reported that some U.S. officials who used to receive briefing materials on a daily basis have stopped receiving them in recent days. However, a senior defense official added that the restrictions may be temporary. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And closely watching the latest developments in South Korea amid the leaked documents sparking allegations of U.S. spying on its allies, the nation's top office has once again ruled out the possibility of Washington wiretapping Seoul. The two nations' trust seemingly remains strong as they're set to enhance intel sharing. Oh So-young reports.
South Korea aims to build stronger trust with the United States in information sharing and cybersecurity, as U.S. federal investigators probe the leak of classified Pentagon documents. Addressing the confidential conversations from Seoul's top security circle that were reportedly included in the documents, the South Korean president's office has maintained that many of the details reported in the media appear to have been altered. The office has also downplayed concerns of whether the U.S. has been eavesdropping on the country's National Security Office. A high-ranking government official told reporters on Friday that the contents published in relation to South Korea cannot be verified at this stage, but to his knowledge, most of the details do not match the facts. He emphasized that Washington is still investigating the matter. Regarding concerns that Seoul's top office had been compromised, he reiterated that Seoul has no reason to believe the U.S. had been wiretapping the country or carrying out malicious activities. Less than 2 weeks ahead of the summit between Presidents Yoon and Joe Biden, the official stressed the need to uphold the strength of the bilateral alliance, implying that misunderstandings and domestic criticism could cause damage to their solidarity. On that note, he said Yoon and Biden are expected to strengthen information sharing between the two sides. The summit, he said, is expected to produce a separate document on cybersecurity that lays out measures to reaffirm mutual trust based on the production and use of reliable information. Through close cooperation, the official noted that Seoul and Washington are already tracking North Korea's online money laundering activities through various cyber technologies and investigative techniques. He added that the preparation of the cybersecurity document had been a long time coming and is unrelated to the ongoing Pentagon leak case. 오수영, Arirang News.
In other news, as widely expected, North Korea claims that its latest missile was a solid-fuel Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile. Solid-fuel missiles compared to liquid fuel are harder to detect and intercept as it can be fired in less than a minute. The latest provocation comes ahead of one of the regime's biggest national events on Saturday. Our Han Sung-woo has the details.
North Korea on Thursday test-launched for the first time its new Hwasong-18 intercontinental ballistic missile that uses solid fuel. That's according to the North state media, which reported on Friday that the missile will be used to carry out the serious duty of war deterrence. It said the aim of the launch was to confirm the performance of the high-thrust solid-fuel engines for multi-stage missiles and the reliability of stage-separating technology, as well as various functional control systems. The Korean Central News Agency also reported that the regime limited the maximum speed of the missile through a time delay separation start method, adding that while the first stage flight was standard, the second and third stages were set to high-angle trajectory mode. The test launch reportedly verified that the new weapon's parameters accurately met all design specifications. Present with members of his family at the launch was regime leader Kim Jong-un, who, according to the KCNA, said the new ICBM will greatly enhance the effectiveness of the North's nuclear counterattack posture. Kim also warned that the North will continue responding aggressively to its enemies and leave them shaking in anxiety and fear. On Thursday, South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said the North had fired a missile of intermediate range or longer from near Pyongyang. It added the missile was launched at a higher angle than normal and flew about 1,000 kilometers before landing in the East Sea. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
In the meantime, the United Nations and NATO have strongly condemned North Korea's long-range ballistic missile test on Thursday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on North Korea to comply with its international obligations under all relevant Security Council resolutions. Through a statement by his spokesperson, he urged the North to reopen communication channels and resume dialogue towards sustainable peace on the Korean Peninsula. NATO's deputy spokesperson in a statement to Voice of America also said North Korea should abandon its unlawful nuclear and ballistic missile programs and engage in diplomacy. He added NATO's stance in strong solidarity with South Korea and other partners in the region. South Korea's Unification Ministry on Friday released the latest version of its white paper on Korean unification. The annual report includes major government policies on inter-Korean affairs over the past year. The 2023 edition includes details of government policies to improve human rights in North Korea and prepare for future unification, as well as the administration's plans for peace on the peninsula, the so-called Audacious Initiative. Noteworthy is the use of the term North Korea's denuclearization instead of Korean Peninsula's denuclearization in the document, with the government emphasizing the need to denuclearize North Korea. Unification Minister Kwon Young-se said the government will approach unification by standing up to North Korean provocations, while expressing hope that the white paper will raise public understanding of the government's inter-Korean policies. A month ago, South Korea announced a plan to compensate the victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through domestically procured funds. 10 out of 15 victims' families that the plan addressed have expressed a willingness to accept the payments, and the process of compensating them will likely be completed today. Choi Min-jung reports.
The South Korean government has begun handing out compensation to Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor, a month after it revealed plans to compensate the victims through a third party. 2 have already received the compensation. 8 more will do so Friday.
As of Friday, April 14th, the government will have paid compensation and delayed interest to 10 families of the bereaved victims who expressed their willingness to accept the compensation.
As the official said, 10 out of a total 15 victims are receiving up to 200 to 280 million won, roughly about 150,000 to 210,000 US dollars. The official stressed that the families of the 10 victims have expressed strong hope that the issue of Japan's forced labor will be resolved as soon as possible. The remaining 5 victims have refused to receive the compensation and have been protesting strongly against the government's plan, saying this issue cannot be resolved without sincere apologies and participation from the Japanese companies. In early March, the South Korean government announced a plan to compensate the victims through domestic funds procured through a public foundation. This plan contradicts the 2018 ruling when South Korea's Supreme Court ordered 2 Japanese companies, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel, to compensate the Koreans they subjected to forced labor. These companies have refused to comply. The South Korean government says it will continue making efforts to meet each and every victim and find a way forward. Choi Min-dong, Arirang News.
On the economic front, the latest data shows that South Korea's domestic consumption is seemingly picking up, but the nation's other major economic pillar, exports, continues to struggle. Our Moon Hae-ryun explains.
March in South Korea saw a rise in domestic demand amid the slowdown of price hikes for goods and services. According to the latest economic trends report released by the Ministry of Economy and Finance on Friday, domestic demand rose across all 3 measured sectors. Retail sales, a key gauge of private spending, saw a rise of 5.3% on month, while facility investment and construction investment saw a rise of 0.2% and 6% respectively. The Consumer Sentiment Index and the Business Sentiment Index also recorded increases. South Korea's CSI rose by 1.8 points from February to 92 points. The ministry attributed this to the stabilization of consumer prices, which saw an on-month rise of 0.2% in March. The increase in consumer prices continued to decline this year, compared to the 0.8% and 0.3% rises in January and February, a clear indication that the pace is slowing. This was backed by price drops for petroleum products, which fell by 14.2% compared to the same month last year. However, prices for fresh produce continue to jump, rising by 4.7% on year, as well as prices of services such as dining out and accommodation fees. That being said, the overall consumer price index saw a smaller rise than the previous month, going from a 5.5% increase on year in February to a 4.4% increase in March. Meanwhile, exports continue to fall due to a slump in ICT exports. Exports fell by 13.6% on year in March to some $55.1 billion US dollars, with the daily average falling by 17.3%. Compared to the previous month, however, the country saw a $5 billion rise in exports. The ministry cited the prolonged war in Ukraine as well as monetary tightening around the world as being behind the global economic uncertainty. They aim to focus their efforts to continue strengthening exports, investment and domestic demand, as well as stabilizing consumer prices. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
The South Korean economy is expected to struggle through the first half of the year amid global price hikes, but will show improvements into the second half of the year. Currently on a trip to Washington for the group of 20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting, Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho said on Thursday that the government will not let its guard down as price increases in the country slow and will continue to work to keep prices down. The IMF slashed its 2023 economic growth outlook for South Korea to 1.5% earlier this month, a 0.2 percentage point cut from 3 months earlier. But it forecasts a 2.4% on-year growth for 2024. The World Bank also anticipates further improvements for South Korean economy next year. The International Monetary Fund says that South Korea's 2023 economic growth rate was lower due to deteriorating semiconductor industry and slowing domestic demand. Speaking at a press conference for the IMF World Bank spring meetings in Washington on Thursday, the IMF's Asia-Pacific director cited a slowdown in consumption, austerity measures, and adjustments in the housing market after the COVID-19 crisis, causing weaker domestic demand. But he also cited China's lifting of COVID borders will have a positive impact on South Korean economy. The IMF earlier this week lowered its outlook on South Korea's economic growth to 1.5%, down from its January forecast of 1.7%. At the National Assembly, lawmakers have once again voted on the controversial surplus rice purchase bill that was vetoed by President Yoon. This time, though, the bill has failed to pass through, meaning it will not be able to be resubmitted anymore. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
The National Assembly on Thursday voted not to override President Yoon's veto last week of the contentious revision to the Grain Management Act passed by Parliament earlier in March.
I declare that the revision to the Grain Management Act has been rejected with 177 approvals, 112 rejections, and 1 abstention.
The bill did not get the two-thirds majority of the present lawmakers needed for the veto to be overridden. The opposition-led revision to the Grain Management Act had called on the government to buy surplus rice if demand falls short of production by 3 to 5% or if prices fall by 5 to 8% or more from the year prior. In exercising his first veto, President Yoon had said the bill goes against the government's aim of increasing agricultural productivity and incomes for farmers. Just before Thursday's anonymous vote, lawmakers from both sides of the debate delivered their stances.
This would only add to the financial burden, and there could be fairness issues in terms of how crops other than rice are treated.
We could not sit back and watch the farmers cry out last year's heavy decline in rice prices. That's why we made the Rice Price Stabilizing Act to prevent such a fall.
Now, the bill, initially not on Thursday's agenda due to disagreements between floor leaders, was brought in via a proposal for change in the agenda signed by 169 lawmakers. The introduction of another contentious bill, the Nursing Act, was held off after a discussion between the Speaker of the Parliament and the representatives of parliamentary groups. Speaker Kim Jin-pyo said the bill will be brought in at the next plenary session after further negotiations have taken place between rival parties. The Nursing Act seeks to improve nurses' working conditions by defining their roles and duties separately from the current Medical Service Act, which puts them, quote, under the guidance of physicians. It's a move backed by the main opposition Democratic Party of Korea, but opposed by doctors' groups who fear the act will lead to confusion in the public health system. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News.
One person died and 34 were injured when a bus carrying Israeli tourists turned over on a road in Chungju in South Korea on Thursday evening. Of the 35 people on board, 33 were Israeli citizens, including the woman in her 60s who died in the accident. According to police, 11 passengers were seriously injured and taken to hospital. The bus was taking the tourists back to their hotel from a trip to Chungju. Police say they were investigating the accident, including testimony about a faulty gearbox. The Foreign Ministry said it plans to provide any necessary support for the victims upon request from the Israeli embassy.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. In Norway, 15 Russian embassy officials are being expelled over allegations of espionage. Norway's foreign ministry said on Thursday that the diplomats were intelligence officers using their embassy positions as cover. Details of their activities have not been made public, but the ministry alleged that these activities were not in line with their diplomatic status. The expelled officials have been told to leave shortly. Russia's embassy in Norway has declared the move an extremely unfriendly step and has promised retaliation. The expulsions come 1 year after Norway expelled 3 other Russian diplomats on similar allegations. Another person suspected of using a false identity and working for Russian intelligence was also arrested last year. Turning over to Ghana, which has become the world's first country to approve a vaccine against malaria. Called R21, the vaccine developed at Oxford University has been described as a world changer in the fight against the disease. Ghana's Food and Drugs Authority gave the green light for the vaccine to be used on children aged 5 to 36 months. Malaria kills about 620,000 people per year, mostly children in Africa. The new vaccine is 77% effective and provides protection for 2 years. It requires 3 initial doses and a booster shot 1 year later. It's unknown when the vaccine will be officially distributed, as securing international funding requires the vaccine to be approved by the World Health Organization. Legendary British designer Dame Mary Quant has died at the age of 93. According to her family on Thursday, she died peacefully at her home. Quant was a leading fashion figure in the swinging 60s and is credited with making the miniskirt popular. Quant's approach to fashion was to put the spotlight on the youth. Her designs were simple and made use of bright colors. They were also more affordable than other designer brands and gave access to new items for women with an income. Quant was born in 1930 in London. Although she had no formal design training, she experimented with clothes from an early age. And finally, the world's oldest known gorilla has gone once more around the sun. The Berlin Zoo resident Fatau celebrated her 66th birthday on Thursday local time with a special feast of fruit and vegetables. She was even given a watermelon with her age carved into it. Her species, the western lowland gorilla, normally lives to the age of 45, meaning she needs a little extra care. She is usually fed softened vegetables to avoid the sugar in fruits. However, Fatau's official age is actually unknown. When she arrived at the zoo in 1959, she was estimated to be 2 years old. Fatau was previously owned by a sailor, but was traded to settle a bar tab in the French port city of Marseille. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Season's worst dust level is finally weakening with rain. Southern provinces are already having much improved air quality, but still, most of the central parts of the country are covered with a layer of dust, so please check the dust level before taking off a face mask when heading out. In terms of rain, clouds have been dropping rain on Jeju, which will gradually spread to the rest of the country and will continue to rain down mostly in southern parts of the country until Saturday. Mountainous regions on Jeju could see more than 120 millimeters of rainfall, along with thunder and lightning, with a preliminary rain advisory issued there. The rest of the south will see 10 to 40 millimeters, but not so much for central regions. Now, highs are hovering around 20 degrees Celsius in most parts. Seoul is having highs that are 3 degrees higher today, but Daegu seeing highs that are about 4 degrees lower than Thursday. We will see more cloudy skies than sunshine for the next 5 days, with rain in the forecast across Korea. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great weekend.